Hello and welcome to another segment of interviews that matter. I'm your host Raj Mehta. Friends, in this segment we bring those guests who influence our lives. This includes elected officials, policymakers, heads of major organizations and other dignitaries. It is my sincere hope that the knowledge brought in by these guests will help our community. Today we have such guest. He has got extensive background in energy and energy related issues that includes alternative energy. His name is Paul DeCotis. Paul was also an energy secretary for the state of New York under two governors. Mr. DeCotis, thank you so much for coming.
It's my
Really
pleasure.
appreciate your time. I mean, you're a busy man. You're running around everywhere and who knows where, from here, there. So really appreciate your time coming here.
It's my pleasure.
And today we intend to grab your mind and open it up and kind of get all the knowledge that you have. Won't be able to get all the knowledge, but whatever we can get out of it on energy related, because that's what your dedication is. So let's begin with your background, Paul, if I may call you Paul.
Oh, sure. Absolutely, Raj. Thank you. And thanks for having me on your show. Very much appreciate it. I started my professional career out of graduate school working as an economist on energy issues.
Oh, okay.
One of the first projects that I had embarked upon was identifying and estimating the job creation potential from alternative energy sources.
Wow.
So this was many, many years ago. Looking at the impact of $1 billion investment in nuclear power versus coal power versus solar versus wind versus energy efficiency. So this was just as the industry was beginning to take hold, looking at the impacts of energy efficiency relative to generating electricity. So we had this concept of a negawatt, right? The cheapest source of energy is the energy saved as opposed to that generated. Following graduate school in economics and working as an economist, I went to school for an MBA in finance and started working doing some financial analysis work of the New York utilities. One of the first projects that I worked on as a financial analyst was the state acquisition of the Long Island Lighting Company many years ago that created LIPA. So I was involved working with the investment banks on Wall Street, estimating the share value for LOCO if the state were going to acquire it. We also did a case study with the John F. Kennedy School in Harvard once we completed this work, so it was really interesting work to cut your teeth on in a financial sphere. Following that, I moved into the strategy and policy area, energy strategy, energy policy, legislative initiatives and the like. So I had my background in business, economics, finance, and then moved it into the strategy space, which was really insightful for me to look at the basis for sound policy. Sound policy has to look at the social aspects as well as the economic and financial aspects of the idea and the policy initiatives. Shortly after that, I started working in higher levels of government as the Energy Secretary for Governor Spitzer and Governor Patterson, where I oversaw the energy agencies in New York. They were part of my portfolio. And then I moved to the Long Island Power Authority, where I was the Vice President of Power Markets and Managing Director, helping oversee the transition from National Grid to PSEG Long Island. Also, I've got a 26-year rich history of teaching at the adjunct level with Cornell University, Rochester Institute of Technology, as well as Russell Sage Graduate School in Troy, New York. So I bring a lot of depth and breadth of experience in the energy area. As you know, now I'm working as a senior director with West Monroe Partners out of our New York City office, where I lead our East Coast energy and utilities practice, focusing on executive advisory and regulatory offerings. That's a snapshot of where I've been in my career.
Wow, it's really, it's really a diverse background, like, energy, efficiency, finance, more, investment, banking, that kind of thing. It's really a diverse background that you have gone through. Congratulations. Very
Oh,
nice.
thank you.
Very nice.
Thank you.
Really nice. Yeah. I mean, not many people have this combination of background.
Yeah.
Like people are only like single, like line of background, but you have got combination, and that's
Yeah.
how you became probably energy secretary, right, for
Yeah.
the state of New York, under Patterson and Spitzer.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. Like when you became the energy secretary, what was your role there? I mean, I know there are like public utilities. Basically, public utilities are affected, right?
Yes.
With your policy decisions.
Yeah, in fact, when I first went over to the executive chamber, the Spitzer administration was embarking upon what we were calling a 15 by 15 initiative.
Okay.
One of the goals of the initiative was to achieve a 15% reduction in electricity use by 2015. So we needed to make sure that we could provide the funding at the state level and through the utilities through a public benefits charge on utility rates. That funded the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority with all of its plethora of programs, both the Renewable Portfolio Standard as well as now the Clean Energy Fund programs. And we also work closely with the New York investor-owned utilities to ensure that they were partnering where appropriate with the state. So this concept of a private-public partnership emerged. We also were able then, in the role I served in, to bring in the New York Power Authority and the Long Island Power Authority. So we had the 6 investor-owned utilities, the 2 public power authorities in New York, as well as the Energy Research and Development Authority coordinating their program and their outreach and funding so that we could achieve the goal. When I left the administration, we were about 12% in of the 15%, which was pretty significant. And we were spending on average close to $1 billion a year among all of the parties that I had mentioned, driving these improvements in energy efficiency.
So basically, you just mentioned energy saved versus energy generated, right? So the concept, like 15% reduction, was basically energy saved.
Correct.
That's and is it like across, like commercial, or is it across the board?
Yeah, at the time we were engaged with private interests who had wanted to try to pigeonhole where the savings would come from. We resisted that because we believed that all sectors, including the industrial sector, could benefit from energy efficiency. So we didn't do it that way. We did a statewide goal. We then coupled that with Governor Patterson when he became governor after Eliot Spitzer, had a renewable energy task force that we also spearheaded. And it's through the Renewable Energy Task Force that we derived the 35 by 20 goal of trying to get more renewable energy into the system. And that was the catapult for the Energy Research and Development Authority to solicit wind projects in upstate New York, some of those larger projects. Very successful projects. Actually, I think it was 30 by 30 for 2030. Yeah. So the combination of the efficiency funding and the renewable portfolio funding really was, we were a leader in the country. So we took our lessons learned from the West Coast with California and those utilities, and we had our own learnings here in New England. New England states were also very aggressive in energy efficiency, renewable investments. So we'd like to think we took the best of both coasts and then created our own programs in New York that we thought could be very successful. And in fact, if you look at the history of those programs and what the Cuomo administration is doing today, I'd have to say that the programs have been hugely successful in not only driving savings, but also driving a clean energy agenda and also new technology developments, clean tech industries in New York State. So I think they've been very successful. And this is where that public-private partnership comes in as really a catalyst for these types of activities.
So this is what, if I were like not knowledgeable as you are, obviously, but if I were if I'm in changing or putting in a solar and the rebates that I used to get, is that part of this program that you were talking about?
Yes.
Yes.
In fact, we had the same program structure for energy efficiency early on. The energy efficiency industry now is going on 35 to 40 years old. And it was really jump-started through government and public incentives, just like the renewable energy and clean tech industry was. The hope and expectation always was that once the industry went through its infancy and it went through its growing pains, that those level of incentives would not be necessary to support the industry. And that there would be competition, there'd be many providers of efficiency and renewable energy services, and those subsidies can dwindle away. And in fact, if you look at the history of government subsidies for efficiency and renewable energy, what be they federal production tax credits or state credits, or state rebates, you've seen a steady decline in those.
Exactly.
And you've seen still an increase in the penetration of these technologies. So I think as a social experiment, you could conclude that the subsidies were necessary to jumpstart the industry, and that the dwindling down of them has not significantly negatively impacted the industry. The industry is now a going concern, and they can make it without the government subsidies today. Many of them
what?
can.
Because of the cost of the, like say for example, solar, to talk about the solar, right?
Yeah.
The panel, I mean, I know that it used to be like the cost was like $38 per watt or $45 watt, whatever. It was too high before.
Yeah.
Now it's probably about half of that.
Yes. I think it's twofold. One is the advances in technology from a lot of smart people like yourself, housing incubator firms here in your offices, demonstrating these advancements in technology that reduce cost. I think the other aspect of it is the more sales that you have, the cheaper the product becomes, because you've got a lot of fixed costs in your manufacture and development and research and development into these technologies. And as you increase sales, you're reducing the unit cost for customers. So I think the advances in technology plus the rapid penetration of these technologies have led to further cost decreases. Also on the solar side, there's what we call the rest of system costs, which in addition to panels would be the personnel infrastructure and the workforce costs, which have also declined as we've embarked upon training of labor, so that you could have trained installers and certified installers. That also reduces the cost of the investment in these technologies.
Also, as I understand that, the cost has gone down because of the manufacturing coming from out of country. I mean, the panels are coming from out of country also. That's another reason, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And without getting into trade wars or tariff wars, I think that's true. And I think if you look at what's happening in many of the developing countries,
right.
There is the opportunity for many of them to bypass the carbon cycle. Rather than building new central station, fossil-fired electric generating plants, they can invest in solar and wind like many of the European countries are doing.
Right.
And many of the developing countries now looking to electrify rural areas are looking at the solar option.
Right.
So we completely bypass the carbon cycle in those developing countries, which is pretty cool. But yeah, those developments overseas and the research being invested, and in particular if you look at the experience in Germany with the rapid penetration of rooftop solar, that also drove down costs. So yeah, that competition from panels overseas has certainly had an impact on prices here.
And the way I understand that, manufacturing here has gone down significantly because of the competition outside.
That's correct.
And that is hurting actually our, is that, I mean, without getting into trade wars.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. In some of the emerging statistics that I've seen show a decline in manufacturing of panels here in the U.S. Based on what was expected. And there's even been some slowdown in the growth of the market in certain parts of the country as well.
Right.
In fact, if I'm not mistaken, there was some disconnect here on Long Island where there was a booming solar industry and incentives were reduced or taken away and panel costs went up. And I know the industry was retrenching for a little while. I don't know the current state. You might. I don't know where it is today.
Same. It's very slow.
Yeah.
It's becoming slow because of the incentives. Basically, it's
Yeah.
incentive. Like people really
Yeah.
were looking for incentive, and that has gone down from
Yeah.
Long Island Power Authority.
I think what
PSEG.
I think what did help the industry was when the Long Island Power Authority changed its solar program structure to allow subsidies for leasing
Right.
payments. You might recall those debates as well.
Yep.
Whether someone had to own the system or lease the system. And I think when the authority made the decision to allow leasing, the industry really took off here on Long Island.
There is a federal level policies are made, and then it's a state level. So common people, like what is it? Normally, is controlled or by the state level policies or federal policy. How does it affect to the state?
I think that's a good question, and it's always a little murky. There's invariably always discussion and debate over federal authority versus state authority.
Right.
In this case, the state, through the State Public Service Commission, regulates the investor-owned utilities. And the municipal utilities, like the New York Power Authority, the Long Island Power Authority, much like the federal authorities, are managed and regulated by their own board of directors. So at a state level, the state executive as well as the Public Service Commission have a large say in the policies that the state adopts and the direction that the utilities go in. Both the municipal utilities, because of the influence of the executive, and also the investor-owned utilities because of the influence of the Public Service Commission. At the federal level, it would policy initiatives take the form of national goals, which we don't really have much at this point. Federal energy policy, in my view, has been lacking for some time. The production tax credits for solar and wind and other energy sources helps. But what really makes a difference here is the role of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC, as well as the U.S. Department of Energy, and where they provide their funding and their guidance and direction. They could either make it difficult for states to pursue their own policies, or they can enable the states and facilitate the states moving toward their own policies. But right now, I'd say it's disjoint. Each of the states are doing their own thing under the guise of federal guidance. So I'd say it's mostly in the hands of the state and localities, the energy policies that they adopt and pursue. And most of the funding at this point is also from the states, not from the federal government.
No funding from federal.
There's still federal government funding from the U.S. Department of Energy, but it pales in comparison to what the states are providing for efficiency and renewables. The U.S. Department of Energy spends quite a bit of money and time and attention on research programs,
Right.
Developing new technologies, new solutions to some of the problems that industry is facing.
So, coming to that point, like U.S. Department of Energy, who basically does spends a lot of money on research and development, right? So obviously, there are different labs across the country which are kind of doing research and
Right.
Coming out with new inventions.
Right.
Paul, you are more knowledgeable and you have a lot of experience in this, and I have heard from a lot of different people that all this money that go into the new inventions. For example, like you have I know people at Brookhaven National Lab. I know I have a friend who are scientists over there, and they have done research include with other labs for 6 technology, which is kind of flexible material kind of technology. So we put all this money and we invest all this money and create this technology, but then manufacturing cannot be done here because of certain XYZ reasons, right? And there is no incentive for any people here to kind of manufacture this. And it's been done outside, and you bring it back, the same invention what we have spent money on. Is that something? What is your view on that?
That's an interesting question, and I'll draw back on my experience.
Right.
A number of years ago, I was on a committee with the National Academy of Sciences.
Okay.
We were funded by Congress to assess the prospective benefits of the U.S. Department of Energy's research and development programs. So this was on the heels of an academy study that looked at the historic benefits of the R&D programs, and Congress was interested to determine if we had to prioritize DOE funding, where should we put the bets, right? Like research and development, it's a gamble to some extent, right? You have to be willing to accept failure. But to try to target the investments so that they have the biggest impact on the economy was an interest of Congress at the time. So we embarked upon this prospective benefit study. We did 2 phases of the study. And what we were able to determine was that there was great benefit to the country from certain DOE programs. Some programs delivered more benefit or had the potential to deliver more benefit than others. But regardless of where the primary manufacturing ended up, whether it was in the U.S. or overseas, we did find that in this study that there was a great deal of private sector funding that was married to the government funding. So that you can't just look at the U.S. Department of Energy funding in isolation without looking at its partnership with the private industry. And in certain instances, many instances, in fact, those private industries picked up the mantle and took the technology and commercialized it.
Right.
So I can't get into specifics over who did what,
Right.
but I'd say it's fair to say that those programs are important and critical to the continued development of clean tech industries. And even if something is manufactured overseas and sold here, we still get benefit.
Okay.
And with the U.S. now, for the past 8 years, we've been at near full employment, which is between 4 and 4.5% anyway.
Right.
I think our job situation is pretty good. I think our investment situation here is good. So I would personally be less concerned about where something was manufactured.
Oh, okay.
I think that's less important at this point.
Oh, okay, okay. So invention is important. Obviously, it's important, but it doesn't matter where it's get manufactured. That's what it is.
I think to a
we
large
still
extent,
benefit.
yeah.
We still benefit
I
at
think
the end
so.
of the day.
Yeah.
On solar is another concern. Like viewers, our viewers have similar concern that like when you put solar on your roof or whatever house or wherever it is, and whenever in a peak time you generate extra energy, and that goes to the grid at a lower rate, and when you buy that same energy back, you have to pay a higher rate. And nowadays, I know that some of the inventions are going on that you don't give the your extra generated energy out. You can store it right in your house, and when you need it, you can use it.
That's right.
So, are you familiar with? What is your?
Yeah, I think it really gets to the fundamentals of energy storage,
Right, energy storage.
coupled with solar,
Right.
or coupled with wind.
Right.
I think energy storage is going to be a game changer in the energy industry, particularly for its support for renewable energy and distributed energy resources, so that you could locate generation closer to load instead of building huge central station power plants with long radial transmission lines delivering power. Storage would allow distributed energy resources to be sited closer to load and be less dependent on the sun, for example, or the wind, because it has the ability to store that power when not in use. The technology is also changing with what are called smart inverters, which help the solar industry in particular be able to provide ancillary services to the grid. Whereas before, the solar would either be used on site or it would be sold back to the utility. Now there's ancillary services for voltage support, et cetera, that can benefit the grid from those technologies. And net metering, which is what you were referring to before, where a customer with solar on the rooftop could generate and use solar and then sell back to the grid. In many parts of the country, that's beginning to wane because it is many would argue, not a sustainable way to acquire solar resources. Because in essence, other customers are subsidizing that solar residential rooftop system, as opposed to anyone who benefits paying the cost. So you could better align the benefits and costs to an individual or to a company, as opposed to having those costs socialized over all of ratepayers. So that's changing as well in different parts of the country. But it is important to note that we are a country of 50 states,
Right.
with multiple investor-owned and municipal-owned utilities.
Right.
And each of the 50 states really does their own thing. So it's hard to generalize across the 50 states and across all the regulatory jurisdictions and utilities. We see trends emerging and we see patterns, but each state does pursue its own goals and policies.
Yeah, I guess state like Florida can probably do got a lot more sunny days there.
Absolutely.
Than what we have here. in New
Absolutely.
York. So they can generate far more. They can make use of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, if you look at the Arizona,
Yeah.
Colorado,
Right.
Florida,
Right.
Hawaii,
Hawaii, right.
big solar programs there with huge success.
Now, what do you think about this Tesla? Is kind of trying to create this similar storage devices where you just put it in your house and you connect it instead of in the grid. You just and then you can store all the energy extra energy that you created.
Yeah, the Tesla power banks.
Yeah,
yes.
right, power banks.
If you recall, there was an initiative a number of years ago for fuel cells, residential fuel cells. The goal was to try to get the fuel cell to be the size of a refrigerator that you could put in your basement to serve similar purpose. So they would be natural gas fired, and everyone would have them in their homes. Now that's the case with storage technology. Everyone thinks they can have storage in their homes or in their buildings, and then have solar on the rooftop, and that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. And I think it will happen, but it will happen in different pockets of the U.S. where the resource coupled with storage makes the most sense. I could see it in the next 5 to 10 years making huge inroads in certain parts of the country, and other parts of the country where the economics just won't work. There's not enough solar insulation. There's not enough. The prices aren't high enough for electricity to support the technology. But I think we'll see it, and we'll certainly see it in our lifetime over the next 5 to 10 years, I'm sure. But it'll be pockets in different parts of the country. But I think it's an interesting concept, and I think the technology is there.
Right.
It's a question of bringing the size down and bringing the cost down.
Right. You have given us a lot of insight into solar, and of course, there are a lot of other countries, as you mentioned, in Europe, like in Sweden. When I was there in Sweden, like few months ago, they are like achieving total like 100% in alternative energy goals, right? So obviously, U.S. is far behind, and it's a large country. U.S. is a large country, so it makes a difference, right? So what I wanted to go is, there is something called hydrofracking. Few years ago when I was interviewing Senator Martins, and he was also going into hydrofracking. Why it is controversial? It's a controversial issue basically because you going inside the land, and then basically there may be some contamination or something.
Right.
So what is your view on that?
That's a really interesting question. It's still very controversial. And you might be aware there is a hydrofracking ban in New York State. I believe there's also a ban in several of the New England states.
Right.
What is clear is that it's a technology that works for the extraction of gas from deep inside the earth, from shale. So the technology works. The technology has been researched for many, many years. In fact, New York, in fact, had sponsored some hydrofracking research in the southern tier of the state many years ago to develop and prove the technology out, which has been proven. The questions that really the industry struggles with are more environmental and social issues, not the technology issues. There are many who claim that there are very significant negative economic effects, environmental effects of the technology.
Right.
water contamination, disruption of roads, and just the ecosystem. And there are many who claim, and there are studies that support, there are minor tremors and earthquakes caused by fracking. I can't speak to that other than what I read. I'm not expert in it. But there's also great economic benefit from areas of the country that do allow hydrofracking and drilling,
Right.
with landowners really getting a nice economic boost, either from the leasing or the selling of their properties. So the way I see it, it's a technology that works for extraction of gas, but it is not without social, economic, and environmental ramifications, some quite negative. So I don't really have a position on it other than it is what it is. States that allow it do it. States that don't. It's still a reserve that stays in the ground if it's untapped. And at some point, if the technology improves, maybe that situation will change in certain states.
So we were talking about hydrofracking, right? So obviously, there are plenty of gas in our country, and if we allow, or states allow hydrofracking, then obviously we wouldn't have these any energy issues. We don't have to even worry about any other alternative energy like solar or anything like that, right? But as you said, there's an environmental issue, there's social impact, and so it's some of the states doesn't allow.
That's correct, and I do think that the issue that we're facing in the U.S. is not so much the availability of the fuel.
Right.
It's there. The gas is in the ground, the oil's in the ground,
Right.
and it can be extracted. Where there's a need is for different parts of the country to build infrastructure to deliver the product to market.
Right.
There are areas in upstate New York, as well as Long Island, and New England, where it's difficult to get new supplies of natural gas to support economic development and support the cleaner technology revolution, which people argue can be fueled by natural gas.
Right.
So there's virtually no coal any longer in New York or New England. That has been predominantly replaced with natural gas. If you look at the potential growth in electricity load from, say, electric vehicles, if electric vehicles make a big penetration in the industry, there's going to be a large increase in the demand for electricity to charge these cars.
Right.
If that happens, there's going to be a need for new electric generation resources.
Right.
We can get whatever we can from energy efficiency, right? So if somebody uses less, it makes more available for someone else.
Right.
We could look at the penetration of renewable energy as a potential source to power these electric vehicles. But many in the industry argue there's going to be a need for more natural gas to get to local markets to generate electricity for these vehicles. So I think at some point in the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to have to grapple with that issue. And that issue is natural gas a bridge fuel to a cleaner energy economy?
Right.
Or is it just one more fossil fuel power plant that's going to be with us for 50 years? Those debates are going to have to happen. And right now I think we're at a place where electricity load is slow, growth is slow, both peak and electricity use. So we haven't hit that yet. But I think we're going to hit the wall, and there's going to have to be a very conscious discussion and decision over how we're going to fuel this electric vehicle infrastructure, if not with new natural gas plants. And I don't know what the answer is, but I think that the policy discussions are going to have to happen. And I think in 3 to 5 years, we'll see some decisions made. There's a lot of activity, as you know, on Long Island with offshore wind being proposed and the 90 megawatts being developed by Deepwater Wind that's being purchased by LIPA. That's a great thing. And we're going to need a lot more of that coupled with storage technology if we're going to support the electric vehicle industry.
Yeah, I mean, electric vehicle is bound to come, right? I mean, within the next whatever years, number of years.
Yes.
It's going to grow, market will grow, and at the same time, the demand for electricity will really grow. There will be infrastructure
Yes.
needed for, like what we do now, gas, with the
That's
gas.
correct.
When we go out and fill up the gas, similarly we have to charge it, right? So that will also, the infrastructure will be needed for that. And for that, where does the nuclear energy stands on in all of these things? Because nuclear also can help a lot.
Yeah, I think nuclear can. I also suspect that New York has a large fleet of nuclear power plants. And as you know, the Indian Point facility is targeted to close.
Right.
I think it's in the 2022, 23, 24 time frame, Unit 1 and Unit 2. And there are now the states, I know Illinois and New York, are providing funding to keep the nuclear plants open,
Right.
because they are a non-greenhouse gas emitting generation source.
Right.
I don't see, although it might not be a bad idea, to see more modular nuclear power plants being built. They can be more distributed. They can be smaller in size. They're non-emitting, and as long as there's a way to handle the cleanup once the plants are done, to store the waste or transform the waste, I think there's a role to play.
Right.
It's still a very expensive technology, and quite frankly, from what I see throughout the country, I don't see anyone really clamoring for building a nuclear power plant in my backyard.
Right.
I just don't see it.
The same thing, social issue.
Yes, I just don't see it. Not that it can't be part of the solution,
Right.
but not right now.
Yeah. You also write blogs and columns.
Yes.
What kind of blogs that you write?
I write a bi-monthly column for the Wiley Natural Gas and Electricity Journal.
Okay.
I tend to focus on federal issues as they affect the wholesale electricity markets. So in my previous roles, I was a market participant in the New York Independent System Operator market, the New England electric market, as well as the Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland PJM market, buying and selling electricity in those markets. So it gave me a perspective on how the three different regional transmission organizations work, the rules that they have in place. So when you are buying and selling electricity in each of the three markets, they have different market rules. So when I was offered the opportunity to be a columnist, I decided to focus efforts on the interplay between the national energy policy and Federal Energy Regulatory Commission actions vis-a-vis the regional transmission organizations and state policy. So I try to bridge the gap between what's happening at the federal and national level and what's happening at the state and local level. And I get very positive reaction and feedback from people who read the column. So I think it's doing a service, and it's identifying areas that some folks just don't talk about. So it could shine light on certain issues, which I think is helpful to the industry participants.
Where is on internet is available then?
Yes, it would be Wiley's Natural Gas and Electricity Journal.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay, good. Let's talk about AMI.
Yes.
Advanced metering, right? I mean, is this something new? Is it a new concept? Like residents, residential areas that we have all the metering that,
Yes.
gas for gas and meter for electrics, right? Is this AMI is what? What is AMI?
AMI is a metering technology and backbone infrastructure that has many benefits. For example, it could eliminate the need for estimated bills. It eliminates the need for truck rolls for personnel to drive to a residence or a commercial building to actually read the meter.
Okay.
Because through the frequencies, it'll transmit interval data back to the utility. So it communicates directly with the utility operation systems. It will give your load profile. So the utility can identify patterns of use, for example, by interval. So every 15 minutes, there's a meter read uploads to the utility system, and they could look if you were to graphically illustrate it. The utility has the ability to see how each commercial building and each residential customer is using electricity over the course of a 24-hour period.
Right.
That then gives the utility the benefit of being able to better manage load. So if you are participating, Raj, in a demand response program, and the demand response program is one where you would agree as a customer to reduce your electric usage at a certain point in time. It could be either at the call of the utility sees that there's a lot of stress on the system, and it needs to reduce load. So it could send a signal to you, and you could reduce load and get paid for it, which helps stabilize the system. I'm putting this in very simplistic terms.
That's better.
Or it could be price driven, so that you could have with the AMI meter, you could have a time of use rate. So that instead of paying an average cost per kilowatt hour or per unit of electric use, you're paying by time of use. So at the time, as you mentioned earlier, with solar, being able to provide electricity at the time of system peak, there could be a price signal sent by the utility that tells you you're paying a lot for this power at this point in time, which might cause you to reduce your usage. You'll turn off some lighting, you might raise the temperature on your air conditioning, you might turn off your pool pump to save electricity and stabilize the system. You can't do that with non-AMI meters. The other benefit that derives from the AMI meter, in addition to grid resiliency and control, because you can target and isolate outages on the system. Whereas currently, if there's an outage in an area, you'd have to call your utility and tell your utility my power's out. They would have no way of knowing that unless you called. With the AMI meter, they would know immediately that this group of customers in this area lost power because we're not getting reads, and they could isolate the location of the outage, whether it's a tripwire or tree fell, and they could dispatch a crew immediately to fix it. So there's benefits all the way around with AMI. Some customers are concerned about privacy of data. They don't want that data to be used by third parties who might be unscrupulous, but there are data protections in place that the utility guarantees. And in some cases, customers do want that data made available to third parties so they could avail themselves of energy efficiency services. So if I knew, for example, as a utility what your usage was, I might reach out and contact you, and I might talk to you about some services I could provide you that would lower your energy bill. Because now I have access to that data because you gave the utility permission for me to have that data. Now I can provide value to you. So there are many benefits to it. I see very little downside, but there is still some controversy over AMI. I know some states moved very quickly and rapidly to deploy AMI throughout the state, California being one. New York was a little slower, and in part, there are some discussions being had that there could be leapfrog technologies to AMI. That you don't need to put in this big costly infrastructure, that there could be a leapfrog technology that comes along in 2 or 3 years that provides the same benefits. I'm not aware what that might be at this point, but New York is now embarking upon an AMI strategy, and many utilities, in fact, are deploying advanced meters now in New York.
Is it similar to LIPA Edge? I mean, I remember, putting a thermostat in my home, and it kind of, does similar thing.
Yeah, that was more of a demand response program.
Demand response.
Yeah, where if I'm not mistaken.
But not data doesn't give. It doesn't transmit data.
No. Not to the best of my knowledge, unless the program changed. But the LIPA demand response program was effective. When I was there and we were meeting periods of critical peak, we were able to call participants and they would be able to reduce load. If I'm not mistaken, at any given time, we could reduce between 20 and 40 megawatts of load, which was pretty significant to avoid those critical peak periods.
So tell us something like, if I want to reduce or make my home more energy efficient, what should I do and what will be my first step or whatever steps I have to take?
I think the first thing you would do would be to consider changing out your lighting.
Okay.
Unless, of course, you're an electric heated home. If you're an electric heated home, you might want to look at geothermal heat. You might want to look at some other technology that's more efficient than electric heat. But lighting is a big use in the residential sector, followed by appliances and HVAC, heating, ventilation, air conditioning. And you can pick up the phone today and you can call an energy services company that will come to your home and conduct an energy audit. In some cases, those energy audits would still be subsidized. So you get the benefit of a report detailing all the areas where you as a residential or commercial building like yours here, Raj, where you could save money. They'll identify the technology, they'll identify the cost of the technology, they'll even help you find funding to pay for the technology, and then you'll get all or a portion of the savings. So in some cases there's performance contracts or shared savings contracts where it would cost you as a commercial building owner no money up front, but the energy services company will come in and retrofit your building with energy efficiency measures, and you will pay it back out of your energy savings. So your bill would be reduced by 10 to 20 to 30%, and then a portion of that you would pay to the energy services company, so it costs you nothing out of pocket.
Wow, okay.
Very,
that's
very
good. That's
efficient
very
strategy.
efficient, right.
Yeah.
So all these companies, you can find it on what, internet?
You could find them on your, likely on your utility website. Utilities are required to provide such information to customers, so customers can do it. Other customers, just in the marketplace, there are energy service companies that market directly to customers. I won't mention them, but there are a number of them that they'll put flyers on your door for solar installations, and many of those companies, while they're doing a solar installation, will also look at how they can reduce your usage so that you're not generating electricity through solar that you're wasting, right? It makes sense to marry an energy efficiency investment with a renewable investment to make the most use of it.
LED lighting is one of them, right? LED usage
Yes.
of LEDs, right? Big difference.
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah.
That could be a big difference. And also, like what I heard, I don't know whether I'm right or not, but unnecessary, whatever you plugged in, unnecessary thing, just take out from the plug.
Yeah,
unplug it, and that may make a difference. Is that true?
Yes, that's true. They call that ghost load.
Okay.
Yeah, the ghost load is, I see them here in your your surge protectors.
Right.
When those remain plugged in, they're using, drawing some electricity. It's small. I think it's, last statistic I looked at, it might be 1 or 2% of your usage. But yes, if you unplug television sets, if you unplug microwaves, you unplug electronics that you're not using, you could reduce that ghost load. And many people argue you should always do that. Things like LED lighting, if you recall, the federal government passed a lighting standard. There was a big push. In fact, years ago, I was on another committee with the National Academy of Sciences where we, from a U.S. Department of Energy perspective, we were asked to look at the efficiency and the efficacy of LED lighting.
Right.
And that helped support the development of the federal standard that lighting had to meet a certain efficiency requirement. There was a big push to outlaw incandescent lights. Instead, what Congress did is it set a standard for efficiency. So you could meet it with any kind of lighting product, which I think was a smart move. Rather than picking a winner of technology, they set the standard, much like setting a standard for corporate average fuel economy standards, right? Instead of telling car manufacturers, we prefer this technology over that technology, they simply said, we're looking for the vehicle fleet to meet this mile per gallon standard, however you want to do it.
Right.
That's how you really let research and development blossom. You put the challenge there, and industry response. But yeah, LED lighting, energy efficiency in buildings should be the first course of action. In fact, you could argue that any time a utility hooks up a customer,
Right.
there should be an audit of the building before the electricity is even turned on to eliminate any unnecessary electrical use.
Yeah, I mean, that can help a lot,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
Yep.
Significantly.
Let me ask you this now, since, I have to ask you this, that, what is your view on election this year? This is totally different.
My view on the election this year. Which election?
November.
Which one?
Democrats,
Federal,
Republican,
state,
federal,
local?
who's going to control Congress? Who's
I
gonna
don't know.
control Senate?
I don't know.
And obviously, governor's election is this year also.
I have one hope,
Yes.
and I know hope is not a strategy,
Mm.
but I hope that the politic of the day galvanizes voters,
Mhm.
and that voters really do get to the polls and they vote their conscience. Whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, whether you're conservative or liberal, it's incumbent upon us as U.S. citizens to vote.
Right.
And the outcome of the election stands, as we've seen. I've seen many in my career, I'll call disruptive elections where the expected candidate didn't win.
Right.
And it might be difficult for a few years to acclimate to a new leadership style and new policy paradigms. But the beauty of our election cycle is it has the opportunity to change every 2 years with Congress and every 4 years at the presidency.
Right.
And every 4 years, depending on the state, at the gubernatorial level.
Right.
So we always have the opportunity to change it if we don't like it. So I would put the challenge out to citizens, young, old, to get out and vote. And whatever the election results are, I will honor and adhere to.
Whatever your heart says, just vote.
That's right.
It's important to vote.
Your heart and your conscience.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Not
There
only
you
for
go.
yourself and your own benefit, but those of society as generally. Yeah.
Well, I don't want to go in too much into detail, but thank you so much.
Sure,
Thank
sure.
you. Appreciate your time today.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure being here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today. If you have any questions, comments, you can email me at rajmitv@gmail.com. That's again rajmitv@gmail.com. Until next time, have a great week ahead.
Thank you.
So much.